This?
The one that's on the class website.
The underscores?
Yeah. Should we go on there now?
So there's two links on the class website. One is going to the main, the starter theme that we're going to be dealing with. The other one is the one that's Design Bombs. That's just an article which is kind of talking about this starter theme. And again, I would encourage you to kind of read it on your own time, just to kind of get a little bit of a better understanding about the way this theme works. But we're also going to be talking about this as well in class. Is that your question?
Yeah.
Okay. So, yes. So just to review a little bit, when we have here we go. So when we install WordPress, this is kind of the root of our WordPress website that's got all these different files that come with WordPress. The WP blah blah blah. In particular, we have these folders: WP admin, WP content, WP includes. For the most part, when it comes to being like a WordPress developer, we really don't want to edit anything outside of WP content. WP content is going to contain our theme files. It's going to contain plugin files. It's even going to contain as far as like media files that we're going to actually edit. Anything outside of WP content is what is considered WordPress core. And unless you are like a person that's actually working on like the WordPress content management system, generally it's considered bad practice to edit anything outside of the WP content, because this is like WordPress core files, and we don't want to do anything that would kind of mess up WordPress's general functionality. So if we go into WP content, this is the one that exists on my local drive, and again I have a folder for plugins, I have a folder for themes. If I were to actually look at the one that is live on my host, also inside of WP content, I also have an upgrade folder as well as uploads. Uploads is where we would see pretty much like, we would see a list of folders by year, and inside of the folder by year we would see a series of months, like folders by month. So this would be 10 representing October, this would be 11 representing November. And inside of any of these folders we would see all the photos or files that I uploaded in that particular month of that particular year. I thought I actually did upload some, but I guess not. But anyway, so this is where we would actually see any files that we uploaded. So again, all of this is inside of WP content, and while it would be pretty rare to edit anything inside of plugins unless we're actually developing a plugin, like I said, everything that we're typically going to touch as WordPress developers is going to be inside this WP content, particularly where we go into themes. So by default, when you first install WordPress, we have a series of themes that come in there by default. Right now, the themes are 2015, 2016, and 2017. I guess they've just been too busy to develop a 2018. But if you actually log into your dashboard and go under Appearance, again, you're going to see a representation of those themes. I see 2015 here, I see 2017 here, and I see 2016 here. And I believe it will, when you first install WordPress, the 2017 will be active by default. So when 2017 is active, if I go to my website, I see the general 2017 format. It's got this photo at the top for the home page. And normally with the WordPress settings, like I would see a list of posts here, but I did change some of the settings by default here. So any additional folders that we have within the themes folder of WP content are going to be representative of other themes. So I have this folder in here, which is CE221810. I just called it as far as the year and the month, just as a way of kind of tagging this so that as I develop more themes, and I've done this like for personal projects, where as I develop more and more themes, I usually give it at least a year so that I can, when I go back to this, I say, oh, this is a theme I developed in 2016. This is a theme I developed in 2018. So I can know like kind of how old it is, besides looking at like the file dates around that. So this is what I got from _s. And just to review very quickly, I went through this a little bit more step by step last time. But if we went to the underscores website, really all we need to do is put in a theme name. So in this particular case, I would have put in CE2224 to represent as far as generally when I created this. You could also go under advanced options and put in a few more specifics as far as like your information, as you're the author of this, your personal website, like in case people want to kind of look up like, oh, who did this, and like, let me see their portfolio kind of thing. But you could just simply put in the theme name, and when you click on the generate, it's immediately going to give you a zip of files. So when you download that zip and unzip it, then that is what we're getting here. So this is the general _s starter theme. So again, we make sure that we put it under the themes directory in WP content. It should have the same folder name as like you created here. And when you open that up, then we get all the different files which are related to the _s starter theme. So this is where we're going to be spending the majority of our time, editing these files here. And we're not even going to be editing all of them. We're only going to edit like what we really, really need to. But this is where we're going to be spending most of our time within this theme folder. Any images that are related specifically to our theme are going to go in here. So for example, in my example here, I wouldn't necessarily put this image here in our theme folder, because this is an image that's going to change. This is an image that's related to an article. Same thing with this image here, this image here. All these images are related to articles. However, my logo here actually is an image, and this actually I would put in the themes folder. This is going to be a standard image that should be everywhere. This background, I use the same background for the articles. This background is also going to be in my theme folder, because this is something which involves the theme itself, not just a specific article. So all of these images, all of this text, eventually is going to go as part of the articles that we create in WordPress. And again, this would be what the client creates. So the client would be uploading this image and putting in this text. The client would be uploading these images and putting in this text. So all of that would be done through the dashboard. But anything that is standard, anything that is going to be set that the client is not going to be able to edit, like for example the logo here, the background here, all of that is going to go inside the theme folder. Any questions on that? Okay. So we downloaded the theme from _'s website. We unzipped it and we put it inside of our themes folder. In our FTP, if we're kind of looking at the, and this is in FileZilla, but whether you're doing it in Fetch or CyberDuck or whatever, even the file manager, if you're kind of looking at your computer side by side with what's on your website, again, this should go inside that themes folder. As much as possible, you want to keep a folder on your computer which is an exact mirror of what is actually on your website. So here's where we're starting today. We have the _s theme, and again, you can call this whatever you want. I'm calling it this because it just kind of makes sense to me, but you can call this theme whatever you want. And when you open it up, we're going to get all these different theme files. Now, once you actually upload the underscores theme, in other words, all the different files, then if you go into your dashboard and you go under Appearance and Themes, again, you're going to see a list of all the different themes which are currently installed on your website. And again, generally a theme, this isn't a hard and fast rule, but generally a theme is represented by one of these folders which are inside the themes folder. So again, I have the 2015, the 2017, the 2016. Whichever one is currently active, it'll say active right next to the actual theme name. So right now the 2017 theme is active. So when I go to my website, either if I'm logged in or not logged in, if I go to my website, I'm seeing the 2017 theme. So before I start working on my underscores theme, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and activate it. If you hover over any one of these themes, you should get a button which is going to say activate. So I'm going to activate the one I'm calling CE2224 Fall 2018. So now, this is the one that says active. And now if I navigate to my home page and I refresh it, I see my underscores theme here. And it's beautiful. No, it's not yet. It's very, very ugly. But that's kind of the point. It gives us a blank canvas to work with. If I try to dissect the 2017 theme, then it's kind of an uphill battle. If I go to the client and I say like, oh, I'm going to deliver you this, but I start with the 2017 theme, then I first have to think about, okay, well, how do I get rid of this giant image at the top? Because that's not what I promised. So I have to get rid of this giant image at the top. Then I have to think about like, oh, they have this text logo in here. I'm going to deliver an image logo. So the thing is, I mean, yes, it's possible to dissect the 2017 theme and go from there, but it's really an uphill battle. By starting with the underscores theme, I start with a blank slate, so it's a lot easier to kind of put in. There's a lot less that I have to take out before the stuff that I actually need to put in other words. So yeah, so again, we talked a little bit, I'm going fast just because a lot of this we already talked about, but if I go into my themes file, we have all these different files inside the CE2018-10. Let's first take a look. And how we want to do this. Okay. So these are my static, this is my static HTML website. I have two HTML pages here, index as well as article, and I have a style.css. If we go and take a look at this in the folder, again, my website just simply consists of these two HTML files, this CSS, I have the main jQuery library in there, and I have a bunch of images in here. You'll notice that I actually separated out, just because of a little bit of foresight, I actually separated out the images which are related to the articles as opposed to the images which are related to the theme. So I only have really 4 images in here which are related to the theme. At least for right now. So, there's a couple of different ways of working with this, but I'm going to go ahead and have what is my static HTML website kind of side by side open with what is my underscores files. So first, let's go ahead and take a look at header.php. So this is inside the underscores. This is one of the files inside the underscores theme. This is the header.php, and I'm trying to remember if I changed anything in any of the other classes. here somewhere. Okay. Well, we have the header.php here. And we see the PHP comments up here. I'll zoom in on this a little bit here. So these comments work exactly like the comments in CSS as well as JavaScript. We start off with a slash asterisk and we end with an asterisk slash. These are PHP comments, but again, it works just like comments in anything else. So this is from the makers of underscores, and this is just telling us, yeah, this is the header for the theme. You can find out more information here. But yes, this is the header for the theme. So this header.php is going to run on every single page of our website. Not anything in the dashboard, but everything that is actually going to be public to the world is going to run this header.php. So much like we would expect with a static website. So this is a static website. We start off with the doc type. We have the HTML tag. We have the head. The head includes any of our meta tags. It includes links to our style sheets, as well as like I have a link to the type kit. It includes the title tag. It includes the link to our jQuery library, as well as any other JavaScript here. All of this is within the head part of our HTML. Right after the head, we have the body. Inside the body, we have like a wrapper. The wrapper wraps around everything. And like from there, we have like our header. And then like we have a content down here. So if we look at this header.php, again, other than these PHP comments here, we see a doc type. We see an HTML tag. We see a head HTML section here. Inside of the head, we see what look like meta tags, what looks like a link. This isn't actually going to a style sheet. This is for something else. But we see what typically goes inside the head right after the HTML. Right after the head, we see the body tag. We see what they're calling page. It looks like page is wrapping around just about everything, similar to what a lot of times we call in static HTML. Like very often we'll have something called a wrapper. In this particular case, the wrapper is like giving us a centered column here. It's a typical way to kind of work with a lot of HTML websites. But this header.php, we'll see again a lot of the beginning general content, but at a certain point it just kind of ends. And where it ends, the very end of this file, there's nothing past line 59 here. At the very end of this file, we have div ID content. So we have a beginning tag here for div ID content. Now, if we open up inside the underscores files, there is a footer.php. I'm going to go ahead and edit that. And the very first thing we see here are some PHP comments again. Again, you can ignore that. It's just giving us a little bit of information. But the very first thing in, as far as code, in our footer.php is the end div of content. So header.php ends with a div with the ID content, and footer.php starts with the end div tag of content. After the end div of content, we have a footer tag with some general information in here, and this ends with page. If you remember in the header.php, page is what comes immediately after the body, which is surrounding everything. So in footer, we start with the end tag of content, we have the footer tag, and then we have the end of page, and we have the end body tag and the end of the HTML. So basically we have a sandwich here. We have the head, which is the very beginning, we have the footer.php, which is the very end, and any sort of content would go in between this header and footer. Now, what constitutes the content is up to you. In my end result here with my static HTML website, even before looking at the code, if I'm going from page to page, whether I'm talking about the home page or all the different article pages, basically what's my head is the logo, is the menu up here, pretty much anything before the white box is my head in both the home as well as the article. What's in my footer is basically just this join us, blah, blah, blah at the very end. I have that on both the home as well as basically any of the article pages. So my content for my article would start with this photo at the top, and then like we have this header information, all this text here. For my home, the content would start with where we have latest news, and then it would get into the various article types. So all of this is content for the home page, and all of this, starting with this image, is content for the article page. But everything outside of this, all of this would be in the header, all of this would be in the footer. So anything that would be code-wise that would allow me to get to this header here would go in header.php. And anything code-wise that would allow me to get this footer would go into footer.php, along with, again, like the end tag for the body, the end tag for the HTML, as well as any other kind of end tags that would be for, like I said, in my static, I have this div with the ID wrapper. In the header and footer, they call it page, but it's essentially kind of the same thing. Questions, Jess?
So the header and footer, those items will not be changing. Like those would be what the client would.
Correct. Ideally, the client wouldn't mess with any code files whatsoever. Ideally, the client is only going to manipulate the website through the dashboard. So we need to give the client the ability, and we're going to be going through this step by step, but basically the client will be putting in this photo, the client will be putting in this text, the client will be putting in these photos and this text, but they'll be doing all of this through the dashboard. So we're going to build it out as far as static HTML, and then wherever it comes to these articles, we're going to, as far as the code, we're going to tell the code to pull the latest features, the latest editorial items, the latest news from basically from the database, but essentially through the dashboard, the client is writing to the database. So we're going to hard code in anything that is standard, anything that the client wouldn't actually change. So we're kind of hoping the client wouldn't change anything with the menu. But we can also talk about like how we can make that menu flexible and changeable in the dashboard as well. Same thing with the footer. There's going to be ways that we can make aspects of the footer editable through the dashboard, but it's a little bit easier to hard code things in. As a general rule with any WordPress or any content management website, you tell the client that the more that they need to edit, the longer it takes to develop. If the client says, "Oh yeah, I'm almost never going to change this," where it says "Join us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn," yeah, I'm almost never going to change that. I'm going to say, "Great, I'm going to hard code that in, and it'll be a little bit quicker to develop." If the client says, "I don't know, I might change this up, I might join or drop different social media things. I need this to be flexible so that I can change it in the content management system," I'm going to say, "Great, I can do that." But it will add like maybe a couple more hours, like to the development of it, because it takes a little bit more time to do that. So the thing is, as much as so the header and footer, we're going to put in things that the client definitely is not actually going to touch. But again, that has to do with a conversation with the client about what needs they actually have. Does that make sense?
That really could take like an hour or two.
Well, it all depends on what needs to be done. I'm going to be showing you a couple of different options with that. But I want to start off with the basics as far as we're going to be hard coding a lot of stuff, and then I'm going to be showing you more and more as far as how to kind of add some flexibility, add some customization. So, any other questions about like just generally how this header and footer works and like what their roles are in the files here? Like I said, we're not going to be touching all of these files in here, but we're going to be dealing with the things that are most important for our needs. Any other questions? All right. So, so it would be awesome if I could just copy and paste everything into the header PHP. But let's be a little bit careful. Let's take a look at this as carefully as we can. So the thing is, there are certain things, if it makes it easier to read and it just like it helps like our brain to see it a little bit better, there are certain things we can get rid of. Obviously, again, like this is just comments. We could get rid of that. It's not going to harm anything. If you like to kind of keep things as clean as possible, just so that it's not actually confusing anything. But of course, again, it's also not getting in the way. So when I was talking through this, I was identifying the things which you guys already know about, like HTML things. Like, oh, I was saying like, yeah, this is the HTML tag, this is the head tag, things like that. But if you were paying attention, you're like, well, I don't know what this is. This is like, you know, why is this extra thing in my HTML tags that I don't typically put in the HTML? Well, with I have a template that I use in brackets that comes up all the time, where I have language equals EN, as far as language equals English. Sometimes it kind of just helps with making sure things are going to be encoded correctly and like how Google identifies the different websites. It's something that's not necessary at all, but this is what it looks like when it's hard-coded in. And as far as WordPress is concerned, this is how it's coded in through PHP, which means that it's technically pulling what language it is from WordPress. So if you were to customize in WordPress, like, oh, my website is actually in Spanish, or my website is actually in French, then the appropriate code would come up here, as opposed to just hard coding it in English. The appropriate code would come up here by forming that in the dashboard. Anyway, again, I'm letting you know because in case like this kind of thing looks confusing. Wherever we see the angle bracket question mark, but especially where we see angle bracket question mark PHP, is something which is PHP code. And generally when it comes to PHP code, again, that's something that's pulling from the database, i.e. the dashboard. So it's something that we could potentially customize in the dashboard. Same thing with this here. So this is setting the character set of the meta tags. Again, I often will have this template where it says the character set to UTF-8, which is a pretty standard character set. And again, if you're dealing with other languages, it helps to kind of have other kind of character sets. But again, it's just pulling that from the dashboard if it's something that you want flexible through that. But it's nothing that's actually getting in the way. So we have this meta tag here, which if you remember from last semester, this meta tag is, it's pretty much you just set it and forget it. It's exactly as it is, and it helps with mobile responsiveness so that it's going to be as standard on your computer as it would be actually on a phone. So with this meta tag, we're able to kind of preview like what this should look like on a phone by shrinking my screen down to a typical phone size. And I know that this is how it's actually going to look on a real phone. If we didn't have that meta tag in there, then the size might be slightly off. This profile, I'm not entirely sure, I'll be honest. But I want to get to this point here, where you see this PHP WP head. So a lot of this stuff is arbitrary, and again, some of you could probably get rid of. This you definitely want to keep. But when it comes to this WP head, this we absolutely want to keep. So what this does, this line here, if we have any plugins which are adding things into the head of our HTML, that's going to come up here where I have this highlighted right now. So different plugins might add in extra JavaScript, different plugins might add in extra CSS, and all of that is going to come up right here. So we definitely don't want to get rid of this. We want to keep this in here because any sort of customization that we do within the dashboard, again, especially referring to plugins, this is going to fill in a lot of extra information. In fact, if I go to my website right now, if I go ahead and view the source, so this is the when I did the view source on my website, this is showing me the actual code that I'm dealing with right now. Like we see the doc type, we see the HTML, it's automatically putting in that language ENUS, it's automatically putting in that char set UTF-8, but for the most part, the code that we see here is very similar to the code that we see in header.php. It's just, again, wherever we see actual PHP code, it's replacing that with what should actually be there from either the dashboard or the database. Anyway, so we see that as far as the header.php, we see that it ends with this link profile thing, and then we get into this WP head, and then we have the end head tag. If we take a look at the view source, we see that link with the profile thing here, and then we see a whole lot of code, and then we see this ending head. So everything here, from the ending head all the way to that link profile, all of this is handled with that. All of this is handled with that WP head. So again, we really don't want to get rid of this. We can put stuff before and after, and it's perfectly fine. But we really don't want to get rid of it because it's going to have things like the title tag, for example. It's pulling the title tag information from our dashboard. Specifically, if we go into settings and general, whatever we have as far as the site title here, whatever we have as the tagline here, it's going to use that site title and that tagline in the title here. So again, all of this is in that WP underscore head. So again, we don't want to get rid of anything, but we can kind of tiptoe around it. So let's get to some actual coding here. If I take a look at my homepage, I have all this stuff in here. Obviously, I don't have to copy a lot of this stuff in here. I have this extra thing in here, but I really don't need it. Now, inside the head, a couple of things that I do really need. I need this link here, because this link is referencing the type kit, and I need, if I want to use my custom type, I'm going to need this link so that I could actually use that custom type there. Do I need this link to this style.css? Well, if I take a look at what's going on in the WP head, it does somewhere. Yeah. It does have a link to the style sheet that is inside of underscore S. So inside of the theme for underscore S, there is a style.css right here. So you could say, like, well, then we don't need to add it because we just need to edit that one there. So there's two ways to go about this. We can either edit the style.css that came with underscore S, and in that case, we don't have to add anything extra because the WP head will take care of it. Or we can add in our own CSS file, in which case we need to add in the link to it, but that way we can make sure that we're not messing with anything that came with the underscore S theme. You can do it both ways. However, I'm going to recommend, probably for starting out, I'm going to recommend doing your own separate file. Which means that if they call theirs style.css, let's call ours something a little bit different. So we called ours style.css as well. So we're going to put in our own CSS into this theme file. And in that particular case, then yes, we do want to add in a link. In addition to the link to the type kit, we do want to add in a link that's going to go to a style sheet because we're going to add in an extra file here. So let's go ahead and do that now. So let's go ahead and add in both of these link tags into the header.php. So the question is, well, do we add this before or after the head? In this particular case, I'm going to recommend it goes after the head. The reason why I'm suggesting this is because here is where it's going to add in the CSS from underscores. So the CSS that came with underscores, it's going to add that in where we see the WP head. That means if we put in our own custom style sheet after that one that came in the WP head, then that means in our own custom style sheet, we have the option of overwriting anything that came before. So for example, say that in the underscores CSS file, say that for whatever reason it decided to color the entire background red. Well, in our own custom CSS, we could say, well, yeah, we actually want the entire background to be white. And if we put that in our own file, then it's going to overwrite whatever came before it. Because with CSS, it's going to read things in order, and whatever comes later, it's going to overwrite things that come earlier, as long as you have the right specificity. So I'm going to put the link to our type kit right after the WP head. I'm also going to put in the link to our custom style sheet after the WP head. But let's make sure that this is actually going to a custom style sheet. So first, if I look at the files, again, they already called their style.css, and I called mine style.css. So one of us is going to have to change. So I'm going to call mine, let's do it this way. I'm going to go ahead and copy the CSS file into the underscores theme file that I downloaded, and I'm going to go ahead and call it custom yeah, let's just call it custom.css. So I pulled this from where I have my static HTML, and I simply renamed it custom CSS. I want to make sure that that's going to update on the live website. Now, if I take a look at the view source, I can see that the way that it links to my to the CSS, which is in underscores, it has the href equals, and then it has the full URL as far as jdavis.urtce.com, WP content, themes, blah blah blah. It's going to the full URL in order to actually get to this style.css. So it's going through the full URL until it gets into this this theme file, and it's looking for the style.css. So I could potentially do the exact same thing for my custom CSS. I could go ahead and copy this entire URL, And this is my header.php where I first just downloaded, or I'm sorry, first just copied over these two link tags. And for the href, I went and copied the whole thing. And I would just replace this last part where it has the file name from style.css to custom.css. Because that is the name of my new, that is the name of the CSS file that I copied over here. So I copied the entire URL to get here. Now, there is a slightly more efficient way of doing this instead of copying the entire URL. First of all, I don't actually need anything before the /wp content. It's going to know to actually go to the root from here and get there. There's also a little bit of PHP code that I could put in here so that it knows how to find this particular file. However, let's keep it simple for right now. We know the file is going to exist at that place, so we might as well just use the full URL, at least for right now. As time permits, I might show the PHP way. There's a PHP code that, again, is able to kind of find the right directory, but let's, like I said, keep it simple for now. So all I've copied over so far in the head is the link to my type kit as well as the link to my custom CSS. Let's go back to my static HTML. We have the title in here. We're not going to copy the title over because the title is handled by that WP head. If I want to edit the title, I'm going to do it inside the dashboard. But we also have the link to the main jQuery library. We also have a little bit of custom jQuery code here, specifically involving the mobile navigation button. So we do want that over there. Now, inside of the view source, if I view source on the home page, inside the view source, if I take a look at this, I don't see a link to the main jQuery library. The main jQuery library might be in here, depending on other factors, especially other plugins that might include the main jQuery library. But because it's not in here, I do need to add it myself if I do want to use this in jQuery. So I'm going to go ahead and copy not only my custom jQuery, but also the link to my main jQuery library here. I'm going to copy that, go into the header.php, and go ahead and paste that in. Again, all this is going after the WP head to make sure that in case there's anything that's going on here, all of this is going to overwrite that. Now, my script tag, which is going to the main jQuery library, inside of my static HTML, all I did was I put in the file because that's where it's looking for it. So here I need to get a bit more specific. First, I need to make sure that it's actually in my theme folder. So I could put it into the root of this. My underscores theme does have a JS folder. So I might as well just put it in there. So I'm going to go ahead and copy my jQuery library over to the JS folder. Again, I could put it in the root, but it doesn't really matter as long as I know where it is. So now my main jQuery library, the jQuery 3 blah blah blah, is in the JS folder inside the root of the underscores. So in my header PHP, for my script tag, I can't just put in the file name. I actually have to put in the path to that particular file. So it's going to be very similar to what I have for the CSS. So I'm going to copy everything up until the file name and paste that in. And the only other thing I need to add in here is the folder name for JS. So it's looking for this inside my domain, WP content, themes, my theme file, or my theme name, JS, and then it's actually looking for that jQuery library, which is where it is here. And again, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that's live on the sign. So as far as the head is concerned, Again, I didn't need to copy over any of these meta tags. I did copy over the links specifically to my custom style sheet. I didn't need to copy over the title because that's going to be handled by the WP head. But I did need to copy over this the script information. So as far as just the head is concerned, the head tag, I copied over everything that I really need to for this particular HTML. Which again, for the most part, I didn't really touch anything here at the very beginning. All I did was I copied in a few of these things after the WP head. So anything I need from my static HTML, I didn't touch anything above the WP head. I just copied, pasted over the things that I need under the WP head. Any questions so far? So when you're looking at your static HTML, again, we don't need to copy over anything that's already there, like doc type, the head tag, the HTML tag, the head tag, the meta tags, things like that. We only need to copy over things which are unique to this particular website and are really necessary. So after the WP head, then again we have the body. We have this little PHP code in here, which is saying body class. Let's take a look at the view source here. So if I take a look at the view source, inside the body tag, we see class equals, and then we have a whole bunch of classes here.
What is view source? I'm getting mixed up. You have a file that's your HTML static, right? That.
Yeah.
You're copying information over to the underscore theme for PHP. And what's the view source? What that you
Is that the inspector?
Yeah. So this is currently my my website.
Okay.
And this is like basically what the public would see, minus the black bar here at the very top.
Okay.
If I just, and this is different in every browser. In Firefox, yeah. In Firefox, if I just do view page source, I'm pulling up the source of this page.
Okay.
So the thing is, this is, when I do the view source, not only is it pulling the header PHP from the underscores theme, it's technically pulling this file, but it's replacing all of the PHP code with whatever it actually, like this PHP code. Yeah, exactly. It's the translation. So it's replacing any of the PHP code with the translation of what it actually means. So for example, again, this is the header.php. And I apologize if I go back and forth without saying which one file I'm actually on. I know it's a little confusing. So this is the header.php, and this is where we have PHP code. Inside the body tag, we have body class. If I take a look at this, the view source, so like actually what is translated from that, inside the body tag, we have a whole bunch of classes here. Now, this is also something that we really don't want to touch. So we don't want to remove this or anything. We want to keep that exactly the same because these classes help to kind of define which page we're currently on. For example, one of the classes here is page underscore ID, I'm sorry, page dash ID dash 7, which is actually technically the ID of this particular page. So if we took a look at this page in our dashboard, we were to actually edit this page in our dashboard, the ID of this page, even though it's called home and this is like from the ID of this page is 7. And we can actually look at that here in the URL at the very top, in case you can't read that. This is the URL of this particular page that we're calling home. And you can see in the URL, you see post equals 7. This might come up later, just so I'm showing you now. But this ID for this page is actually represented in the source in the body. So sometimes there might be something in our CSS and we're like, ooh, just on this one page, I want to do something kind of unique. You can actually say body dot blah, 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 page ID, whatever that ID actually is. And you can actually do something unique just on that one page. So the body class thing is actually really, really cool. Because, again, it's going to put in a bunch of descriptors for what page we're actually on. So we can identify, oh, that we're on the home page. We can identify what template it's actually using. And there's a couple of different page templates that we could potentially use. We could identify the fact that the person right now is logged in. We could identify the fact that the admin bar is visible, or there's no sidebar here. All of this comes out in this body class, and all of this is part of this where we have PHP body class. Again, the main thing to take away from that is just don't take this out or really mess with it. Now, we're trying to find, again, like what we can copy from our static into the header PHP. Let's see. So, yes.
I have like all my username and passwords written down, but like where do I enter them? I'm drawing blank. Is it on WordPress.org that I'm logging in, or is that on me? I just forget.
So, here,
because
remind
we
me.
did it like 2 weeks ago.
To log into the back
Yeah.
of WordPress.
Yeah. Well, are we
So-
gonna do that later?
So we're talking about two different things. One, we're talking about logging into the dashboard. We're also talking about logging into the FTP in order to actually get these files. So right now I'm kind of dealing with both at the same time. Which is kind of a common way of developing this, is to be logged into the dashboard, but also be logged into the FTP so you can kind of see the actual files.
Okay. I guess before I leave today.
Yeah, we can double check to make sure that you have access to the right things. So, okay. So, here we have the div ID page. We have a lot of content in here, which is very important for a typical a lot of this content is kind of important for, like, a typical WordPress website. There's certain things in here which are helpful when it comes to trying to make things as flexible and as customizable as possible through the dashboard. So, for example, if you go down here where it has the nav tag, it has this nav tag here for site navigation. And whatever you don't recognize here as HTML, any sort of like PHP content, like what we have here, PHP content, which is, you can kind of see here, wherever we start off with the angle bracket, colon PHP, all of this has to do with making sure that you can edit this menu in the dashboard. If we were logged into the dashboard, we can go into Appearance and Menus, and I should be able to add in different menu items here, and they would add into the menu normally at this point. So again, this is a conversation you would want to have with the client. You would want to say, like, hey, do you want to edit this menu? Because we can do that. We can make sure that this menu is editable through the dashboard. But if you know for a fact that you're not going to edit this menu, or if you don't mind coming back to a coder in order to make some slight tweaks, then we can develop this a little bit faster. So this is one of those cases where if you want to kind of keep this menu flexible and editable in the dashboard, then you would definitely want to keep this and kind of tiptoe your way around it. However, let's start off, just for today, let's start off with the idea that we're going to keep this inflexible. So we're going to just hard code this menu in so that we can just try to get something up as much as possible today. So, assuming we're going to get rid of all of this, starting with the body and the fact that we have this body class here, we definitely want to keep that in here. But really, I'm just going to give you guys a little bit of a shortcut. We don't really need any of the rest of this. We don't need any of the rest of this. So, starting with my body here in my static HTML. This is my static HTML, this is index HTML here. I'm going to go ahead and copy everything that's below the beginning body tag, including my wrapper, including my header, blah, 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 all the way down to where I have this content. So this content where I have div ID content, and I also have a div, what's called content inner and center column. I can't remember exactly why I did this, but I'm sure I have a reason for it. So I have this div ID content, this div with the content inner and this center column, and right after that is where it starts with home content latest. Home content latest is where I have this H1 for latest news, and if we take a look at that, that's basically the beginning of this right here. This is my static HTML. Let's go into the static HTML for article. If I go into the static HTML for article, all of this should look pretty much exactly the same. So if we go down, we go down, we go down, all the way down to where I have div ID content, the div ID content inner, and center column. Right after this moment, then this starts to be a little bit different. I have this article tag in here, and I start with article image, which has this background image here, and this is where I have the header tag. So if I take a look at my article page, again, the start of the content for the article is this beginning image. So again, your HTML is going to be different. Where the beginning of your content is going to be different from every person in this class as far as how you're actually defining the beginning of your content. For me, when it comes to my home page, which is right here, or my article page, which is right here, again, the place where it starts to be a little bit different for the content of that page is right after this double div here that I have for content and content inner. So, I'm going to copy everything that just is common between both of these, this home and this article page. So everything that's between the beginning body tag and including that double div for the content, I'm going to go ahead and copy this from my static HTML. I'm going to go into my header PHP, and once again, after the body tag, I'm going to go ahead and replace everything that's down below that. And again, the header.php, this is the header PHP from _s. This ends with a div with the ID content, and it has a class with site content. That's the beginning tag of the content here. So again, I'm going to replace everything in my header .php with everything from the beginning of my static HTML. And I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. Cool. So, it'd be great if I could just like set and forget it. But there's just a couple more things we want to change here. So you'll notice that wherever I'm referencing images, so I'm referencing images specifically with the logo up here, with this menu icon. I want to make sure that it knows where to actually find these images correctly. And there's a couple of different ways that I can do this, but the easiest for right now, and yeah, I just want to try to go through some of this quickly, just so you can kind of see what's going on. The easiest right now is to go with the absolute link to my theme folder. So that means going to the full website as far as WP content, as far as themes, and as far as that theme folder. This is how to get into, from my root, I go into WP content. Again, just represent right here. I go into themes. I go into the theme folder, which is CE and a bunch of numbers, and then that's where I get into my underscores theme. So from here, let's go ahead and create an images folder. Oops. So I created an images folder inside of my underscores theme. And from where on my computer that I actually have these files, my static website, I'm gonna go into the images, and I'm gonna copy the images that are from my theme folder, specifically the background, the logo, and this menu icon here. I'm gonna go ahead and copy that over into my images folder inside my underscores theme. So now I'm going to copy this URL, which is going from, again, the root of my domain, WP content themes, my theme folder. I'm going to copy that URL. And wherever I have an image reference here, so this is referencing the logo, wherever I have the image reference here, I'm going to go ahead and replace that with the full path to that. So again, my domain, WP content, themes, my theme folder, and it's looking for a folder called images. I did take off the folder called theme, so that's fine. So now it's looking for this particular file inside of theme folder, images, and then logo.png. So let's go ahead and copy that. And wherever I have an image, I'm just going to go ahead and replace that. Which I think those are the only places. Yeah. So my logo, as well as my menu icons here. Again, this is my static HTML, not your static HTML. So you might have additional images in here. But in my particular case, this is where it's able to actually find those files. Okay. So, I'm going to go ahead and save this. And it's going to go ahead and update on my server. I'm going to go ahead and make sure the images are up there. So, if I go ahead and refresh on my website, so this is what the public sees. I start to see some of this happening here. I see my logo in here, I see my menu, and it's clearly using at least some of my CSS here. Not entirely. For example, we're not seeing the background here, but we're able to start to see some things going on here. Now, this isn't complete yet, but if I go ahead and view the source on this right now, again, we have all the stuff with the head, we have these meta tags, we have this link, we have all this stuff that comes through when we do the WP head. But you'll see the stuff that we added in. For example, the link to our type kit. We see the link to our custom CSS file. We see the link, the script tag that's going to our jQuery main library. We see our custom jQuery here. All of this is what we added in this is the header PHP. All of this is what we added in the header PHP file right after the WP head. Again, going to the body, we have a whole bunch of classes here. We don't want to touch any of those things with the body class because those are going to be helpful later. But right after the body tag, we see div wrapper, we see the head, the header that has my centered column, and all the way down to our double div here. So we have div with the ID content and div with the ID content inner. So again, all of this is exactly identical to what I see in this is my header PHP after the body with the body class stuff. All of this is exactly identical. There's no extra PHP code to confuse me here. So it's basically what you see is what you get as far as the stuff from my static HTML. Really, the main thing that we only changed is the links to the images. But you'll see that right after that double div for the content, well, then it's still adding in a bunch of extra stuff. So we'll have to think about like how it's actually putting this information in and replacing it with the actual content we want. But before we do that, as far as the content, let's take a look at the footer. So we have the footer.php here. And if you remember, the very beginning of the footer.php starts with the end of content. Because in the original header PHP, we had just one div in here with the ID content. Now I have two divs in here because I don't remember why, but I know there was a reason. In your static HTML, you might, or you probably only have one div in here, or you might call it something different. Maybe it's not a div. Maybe it's a section tag, or maybe it's like something else. But however you start the container for your content, you want to make sure the very beginning of your footer is ending that in the same way. So in my particular case, I have two divs for content, and this one only ends one. Right after that, this has the footer tag, and then it ends the page. I call mine wrapper, and then we have this WP footer thing, and then we have the ending body and the ending HTML. Let's take a look at my static HTML. So, the div with the ID content, if I scroll down, this is my static HTML for my homepage. We have all this, which is for my homepage, which is fine. All of that ends right here, where we have a double div for the content inner, as well as the div for the ID content. My footer is actually inside of that. Is that going to be a problem? No, not really. We can set it up in the same exact way. This div is for blah, blah, blah. So that's something specific to the home. But basically, my footer, instead of starting with the end of the content, my footer starts with the footer tag. And that's the footer that I want to be the same on all my different pages. Then after that footer tag, I have the double div for the content and the content inner. And then I have this div that's ending the wrapper. The wrapper, which goes immediately after the body. And then after that div for the wrapper, I really should have put in the comments just like they do. These comments are a very good thing. I would recommend that. But, yeah, let's just put it in and just makes it a little more clear. Okay. So this is how my footer ends. Again, we have the footer tag, we have the ending divs for the content inner as well as the content, we have the ending div for the wrapper, the body, and the HTML. So is that going to be a problem with this one? We're starting off the end of content, we then have the footer tag, all this other stuff. Not really. As long as I'm willing to kind of do a hard replacement, it should be pretty fine. The only thing I definitely don't want to remove or replace is this WP footer. Very similar to in the head, we have this WP head thing here. We really don't want to touch that because this has a lot to do with the general WordPress functionality. So we don't want to remove that because it's going to mess up like as far as how the plugins work. Same thing with the footer down here. Some of the plugins are going to use this space down here to put some extra code to actually make those plugins work. WordPress, the WordPress core, might actually use some of this space to put in extra content. So I don't want to mess with any of this, but I can basically copy and paste code around this to do what I want. So, from my static HTML, this is my static HTML, I'm going to copy everything which is part of my footer, how I am defining the footer. I'm going to copy this footer tag, as well as this content inner, as well as this div with the wrapper. I'm going to copy all of this. I don't really need to end the body or end the HTML because that's going to happen in the footer anyway. But here, I'm going to copy everything that is involved in my footer, except for the ending body and ending HTML. I'm going to go into the footer PHP, and I'm going to replace just about everything, except for the WP footer and the ending body tag and the ending HTML tag. I'm going to go ahead and replace that now. So now the footer ends with my footer tag, ends with the ending div for content enter, as well as content, and ends the div for wrapper. And these three ending divs are all started in my header PHP. So this is my header PHP. This is where I start the wrapper. And this is where I start div with the ID content, and I start the div with the ID content header. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. This is my footer PHP. I'm going to make sure it's updated on my server, and I'm going to go back to my website. I'm going to go ahead and refresh it. You might not notice much of a difference here, but what you'll see is like where it says proudly powered by WordPress, and the theme and blah blah blah. We're going to see that replaced with join us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, because that's a part of my footer. So this now ends the way that I decided it should end, with my static HTML. And if we look at the view source, again, we see all this stuff. A lot of this is added in programmatically by the WP head. But then we see my code right before the end of the head tag. This is all my code here. We see the body, which adds in as far as those body classes. And then we see as far as the wrapper, this is all of my code that I put in, all the way down to, sorry, my mouse wheel's acting weird. All the way down to where I have div ID content, div ID content enter, that double div for the content. So here, where we have div ID primary, this is where WordPress is adding in content. So as far as WordPress is concerned, all of this here is content, because this is where my header.php ends, is with this double div. My footer.php starts with the footer tag. So the very beginning of my footer.php, and if you ignore all these comments, the very beginning of my footer.php is the footer tag, and then we have this double div for the content enter content. We have this ending div for the wrapper. If I go into the view source, we see my footer tag, we see the double div for content enter and content, and we see the ending div for wrapper. Everything else that we see here before the ending body and the ending HTML, all of this is added in by that WP footer. And even though we might not understand all of what this is, a lot of this has to do with the admin bar, actually. But even if we don't understand what this is, we can kind of keep that in there because we want to keep, as far as like how the plugins work. Actually, you can kind of tell a little bit. If you look, these are script files which are going to my plugins for WP security and other things like that. But anyway, so we see my footer in here, which again starts with the footer tag. We see my ending divs in here for the content, for the wrapper, and WordPress is doing its thing, but then we're ending off with the body and the HTML. So that ends up with what we have here. We have our header, we have the content, which is showing up in between here, and we actually have our footer, which for my footer is just a simple join us on blah blah blah. So
What did you say before that the top of your footer, or the top you should have the closing div for content?
So that was with the old header. So with the so yeah. So this is can I pull that up? Give me 1 second. I should have I'm gonna open this up in Notepad. Just so it's not extra confusing. But this is, that's not gonna work. Sorry, okay. This is the old header.php. The old header.php ended with the div with the ID content, and the old footer.php starts off by ending that content div. That's perfectly fine. The way that theirs was set up is when you have a div for content, but the footer actually existed outside of content. So we see the footer is outside of the content, and right outside the footer, we're ending off the page, which is surrounding everything. Now, in my static HTML, the way that I designed this, my footer is actually inside of what I'm calling content entering in content. Now, the word content is completely arbitrary. I mean, I'm defining content a little bit different than _s. That's fine, as long as what's more important is that you're following your template for the static HTML in this particular case. So in my case, the footer is actually inside the content, which is why in the footer PHP, the very first thing is the ending footer tag. And then I end with the double divs for content, entering content, and then we're ending with the wrapper. So I'm following along with what is in my static HTML. If your footer has your footer inside of whatever div you're calling your content, then you want to keep that for your WordPress. If your footer is outside of what you're defining for your content, then yeah, again, you want to keep that for your WordPress. But what makes the most sense is, again, following the format of your static HTML in the header and footer. The only thing, again, at least as far as the footer is concerned, is we don't want to touch this. This should be immediately before the ending body tag, immediately before the ending HTML tag. So these three lines we don't really want to mess with. But everything that exists above these three lines should be exactly the same as the end of your static HTML. Does that make sense? So again, it all depends on the plan that you set up with your static HTML.
Also, I noticed your site, I don't know, for some reason on mine, I think the sidebar is always there. That is something that's showing up.
You said on mine or on yours?
No, on yours it's not showing up, but for me, probably the sidebar is there. This says like recent comments by Spider. It's something that's from the old version.
Oh, that's right. We took that off with the settings. Hang on a second. So,
Oh, like in the dashboard, you mean?
So there's a couple of settings that we set up. Okay. Couple things. One, I should have reviewed this again. When you first install WordPress, it does give you, I think, what's called a sample page. I actually remove that sample page and I create my own page called Home. Now, once you have your own page called Home, I don't think there's anything in here right now. The ABC123, I think I remember where I put that in. Remind me of that later. But anyway, I removed that sample page that immediately comes with WordPress, and I created my own brand new page just called Home. Once I did that, under Settings and under Writing, no, sorry, under Reading, yeah. Anyway, under Settings, under Reading, by default, your home page is going to be on this, your latest post. But what I typically do for most WordPress installs is that I will switch it to a static page, and it's going to say, like, well, okay, if it's a static page, what is your home page? And this drop down is going to be a list of all the different pages that you have set up here. So if you have multiple pages here, for some reason it's not playing with privacy policy, but that's fine because it's not really necessary anyway. But anyway, under settings and reading, again, by default it's going to be on your latest post. I would recommend going to like static page, and as far as under what it says for home page, select the home that you just created before you came to this page. So select that one, and that I believe should get rid of that sidebar, because that sidebar thing only comes if your home page is the latest post aggregation. But double check that. If not, there's one other place where that might come up. So under appearance and under widgets. Under appearance, under widgets, this is that sidebar information. Now, I think as long as you set the home page to a static page, you're probably not going to see this. But if you do still see this, then under sidebar, you're going to see a whole bunch of different things under this sidebar thing, including meta, including, I just put these in here arbitrarily. But if you see a whole bunch of things in here under sidebar, and this is under appearance, under widgets, and sidebar, you can get rid of all these things by clicking on the drop-down arrow here and hitting delete, and hitting the drop-down arrow here and hitting delete until there's nothing under sidebar here. So yeah, you can also go that way. Okay. Any other questions about where we are so far? Okay. So, lastly, it would be, okay, we did the header and we did the footer. Oh, my background. Hang on a second. So for my background is set up inside my custom CSS file. Okay, so if you remember, I took my style.css from, this is my static HTML website. I took my style.css in here and I duplicated over here and we called it custom.css. So, if I go ahead and open up that custom.css, which again is just a duplicate of this, in addition to a whole bunch of CSS, which is just how I have this thing set up, we do have a background image, and again, it's trying to reference something very specific here. It's trying to reference URL, images, theme, and then this image bg space.jpg. Now, just like we did with the header PHP, there's a couple of different ways we can link to this this image. One is just like we did with the header PHP. Is the header PHP from my brand new underscores theme. We copied in the entire path to this particular image, so the logo. And we can copy that, and in my custom CSS, we can go ahead and make sure that we're doing the entire path to that particular file. So that's fine, we can do it that way. However, if you do want to be a little bit more efficient with that, at least with the CSS, this doesn't necessarily work with the header PHP, but at least with the CSS, you could be a little bit more efficient with that. With any file, whenever you're linking to a brand new page, or you're linking to a resource like a image or a JavaScript file or something like that, with any file, you want, when it comes to the path to that, you always want to start where this file actually exists. So in this particular case, what I'm editing right here is this custom CSS file. So from here, let's pretend I don't know where this actually exists. I don't know how I got here. But at least from here, in order to get to the image, I need to go inside of this images folder, and then this is the file bgspace.jpg, which means that from here, in this URL, all I need to do is put in images/bgspace.jpg. Because it doesn't matter where this starts, this custom CSS, but from here I only need to go into images and then I can find that. Now again, this is just a slightly shorter way of getting there. If you're not quite sure about it, again, feel free to kind of put in the full path to that file, just like we were doing with the header.php. But at least in the CSS, we can be slightly more efficient and do it this way, because the path to the file is a little bit simpler. But anyway, if I go in and update that, blah, 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 then my background should, what? Huh. Still trying to find it. Oh, okay. I know what the problem is. Hang on a second. It's not refreshing my CSS. Okay. Okay. So it's not refreshing my CSS. It's still looking at the old CSS file. There's two different ways we can solve this. One is that we can do a hard refresh, basically clearing the cache, so that it definitely looks at the new CSS file. Another way we can do is we can navigate specifically to the CSS file, and we can hit. So right now, if you take a look at this, I navigated right to the CSS file, and right now I'm still looking for it inside the theme folder. If I refresh this page right now when I'm on the CSS, oh, you're kidding me. Did upload this, right? Save this. This is the custom CSS. I save this. Oh, this wasn't updated. Huh. Okay, yeah. So I messed up as far as I didn't actually update it on the server. That was the problem there. Anyway, so we have our header in, we have our footer in. Before we leave today, let's briefly take a look at the content in between, and we'll get into this a little bit more next week. But to get at the content in between, right now, we are on the home page. And if I were to go into the dashboard and we go into pages and go into edit for this home page, right now there's nothing in here. But if I put some content in here, and I click update, I'm going to go back to the public site, and I go to refresh this. I see, okay, so I see this ABC123 here. I'm going to show you where that is. I think we did this I think we did this a couple of weeks ago. I'll show you where I put that at. But we see the title here, and we also see that text, some content. So when it comes to the content that we start here, right now, that is starting after the title. Here. If we take a look at this in inspect element, or the view source, either way, doesn't really matter. We see that the overall content, we have my div ID content and my div content inner. But everything after this is, so far, it's done by the underscores theme. So where we see this primary, we see this ABC123 here, we see main, we see article, we see header, and inside of header is where it actually has that H1 tag for the home page. And under that, we have div with the class entry content, and then this is where we finally get this actual text here. So the text that we put in here, and if we take a look at this in the text thing, I mean, there's no extra HTML here, but the text that we put in here, we're currently going to have some content. Right now, it's showing up where we see entry content, which is inside of, which is coming right after a header, which includes the title. But entry content is inside of article, and that's inside of main with the ID main here, and that's inside of the div with the ID primary. So just keep an eye on that. We have after my header.php with content and content header, we have div primary, main with the ID main, article with some ID, and then inside of article with some ID we have the header, which includes the title, and then we have div with the class entry content. Okay. So, in my underscores files, I'm going to go ahead and open up a file called page.php. And if I open up this page.php, in addition to some PHP comments here, I have this thing called getHeader. We don't want to mess with that. GetHeader, for the most part, is what's pulling over everything that we need before the actual content. But if we take a look at this, we see div with the ID primary, we see main with the ID main, and after that, then it gets a little complicated with this PHP code. But let's ignore that for just a second. But we see div with the ID primary, we see main with the ID main, we see some complicated PHP code, and then it ends the main, and then it ends the div. Okay. So, inside of the view source, or the inspect element, doesn't really matter. Again, we see after my content inner, we see div ID primary, we see main with the ID main, and then we see some complicated stuff, but then after that it ends the main, it ends the primary, and then after primary it gets into the footer. So what that means is if we're looking at our sandwich, it's starting to look like a club sandwich actually. We have the header PHP. Hang on a second, that's the wrong one. Too many files open here. 1 second here. Okay. We have my header PHP, and that ends with the double div for content. Immediately after that, it gets into page.php, which starts off with primary and main with the ID main. Then we get some complicated PHP code, but then it ends with main, it ends the primary, and then after that, it immediately goes into what I have for footer. So we have the footer tag, and then it's ending all this stuff. So again, we're seeing the same kind of thing here. We see the double div for the content inner. We see immediately after that, we see primary, we see main with the ID main, some extra stuff, and then it ends the main, ends the primary, starts the footer. So we can see this is like the header, we see this is the page.php, and then this is the footer.php. Is that part clear?
That's right.
Okay.
Just kidding.
So our page.php is one of the first things that we can take a look at as far as like how it's pulling in this content. Now I keep skipping over this complicated PHP here. We have the div with the ID primary, we have the main with the ID main. I mean, we don't really have to mess with any of that, but this is part of where it's pulling in some the next part of this. Now, next week we'll talk about this a little bit in a little more detail. But you see where it says this get template part, and we have in quotations we have template parts / content, and then it says page. Inside of our underscores folder, we have a folder called template parts. Just like it has up here, template parts. Inside of template parts, we have 4 different files. One is called content, one is called content none, one is called content page, one is called content search. Because we're talking about page here, this is the file that it's actually referencing. So let's go ahead and open that up in brackets. And inside here, the very first thing we see is an article tag. Inside the article tag, we see a header tag. Inside the header, or I'm sorry, after the header tag, we see a div with the entry content. So let's take a look at this again. We have my double div here. Div content, enter. We see primary and we see main. So my header PHP ends with the double div. Page.php starts with primary and main, and then it gets into this PHP thing. After primary and main, in this guy, after primary and main, we see article, and inside the article, we see header, and we see div with the class entry content. So this is page PHP after primary and after main, where we have this complicated PHP. We go into that file which was called content-page, where we immediately see the article, we see the header, and we see this div with the class entry content. So we have header.php, then we have page.php, then we have content-page.php, and then we have footer.php. So this is the order that the files actually go in. And more specifically, so this header.php is in the root of my underscores theme, this page.php is in the root of my underscores theme, and this footer.php is in the root of my underscores theme. Technically, the content-page is inside of where we see template parts. If it makes it more clear, we can put that in. But as far as my home page currently, really any of the pages right now is the concern, it's following this order. It's pulling in the code from header PHP, then it's pulling in the code for page.php, then it's pulling in the code for template parts / page content page.php, and then it's pulling in the footer. So right now, what's making up all this HTML are these 4 files right now, which is what I was calling a club sandwich, or Big Mac, or whatever multi-layered sandwich you like to use metaphors for.
So what's the purpose of having the content page after PHP?
Sorry?
What's the purpose of splitting out the page.php into those 2 parts?
Okay, so if we take a look at, so we see template parts. Template parts, we see 4 different files in here. We see one that says content none, we see one that's page, one that's search, one that's general content. I'm just trying to remember what the general content one is. I can't really remember. But depending on the kind of page it is in WordPress. Now, as far as posts is actually something different. So when we create a brand new post, that's going to actually be its own thing. Instead of page.php, I don't know why they don't call it post, but If we're dealing with posts, it's actually going to be pulling up where it says single.php. So any kind of page that we're creating should be pulling up page.php. However, we still have these four templates that it could be using, where it says template parts. It's either a normal kind of page, it's a page with no content, or it's a page that is a search. Now, if we happen to, so if we're doing a search, which is hard to kind of pull up here, but if we do a search on my WordPress website, right now we get this thing that says nothing found, sorry, but blah, blah, blah. So all of this is part of its own template. In fact, there is a PHP file called search.php. If we take a look at this, again, we always want to try to seek out stuff that we actually really recognize. I actually thought that title was in here, but it doesn't matter. So anyway, it is kind of pulling up this search.php, and more specifically, like you see where it says get template part, we see template parts / content, and this last word here is search. Whereas in our page.php, we have template parts / content, and the last word here is page. So page.php, page.php is pulling this file, and search.php is pulling up this file. And it's really just the makers of underscores was trying to set this up so that you could have a different template for like what comes up in your search results, a different template for what comes up when you get a 404 error, you can't find any kind of file whatsoever, but also a different kind of template for what comes up on a normal page. Because otherwise, if all three of those were part of the same template, then what you'd end up with is a very long template page of like, if blah blah blah, then if it's a 404, then do this. If it's a search page, then do this. If it's a normal page, then do this. And you end up with a very long page. So the makers of underscores have said, you know what, search and 404s are not quite as common. So why don't we separate that into different files so that if you don't really care, like for the purposes of this site, maybe I don't really care that much how the 404 page looks. And maybe I don't care that much about how the search page looks. I'll say like, yeah, it could just look the way that most of the pages look as far as the default, whatever. Then I never have to actually touch those files. I never actually have to customize anything. Whereas if it was all part of the same thing, it would just end up as one long page. Does that make sense? So it's kind of partially a decision by the programmers of underscores S to separate that out. But that's basically the logic behind that, of why they did that anyway. So, it's almost 8 o'clock already. So, like I said, hopefully you have enough to at least kind of get started with the WordPress build out. I wouldn't expect you to get much further than I got today, in the sense that you're basically just deciding what you need to copy over from your header and your footer to actually get into this here. So if you can get to like this point before next week, that would definitely be best. But again, I don't really expect you to get much further than that. Next week, we're going to be getting into specifically dealing with like the actual content in between. How do we separate out what is on the home page? Because obviously, the home page is a very different template than what we have as far as an article page. I'm not doing this right. What we have as far as the home page is a very different template than what we have as far as the article page. So how do we separate that out? How do we make sure this is pulling various posts? We'll call these posts. How do we make sure this is pulling various posts instead of just hard coding his head. So we'll talk about that starting next week. But like I said, if you can get to the point that we got to today with your website,